Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, an update on Israel's bombing of a tent encampment in Gaza. They did it again. 2 days after calling its May 26th bombardment of a Rafah displaced persons camp a tragic mistake, Israel continued to bomb Rafah yesterday, killing 29 additional Palestinians in the course of 2 different strikes. Per reporting from CNN, the first bombardment hit a displacement camp a mere 150 meters from the scene of Sunday's bombardment. The second strike is alleged to have happened in a southern coastal town called Al-Mawasi, which had also been designated a safe zone, into which thousands of Palestinians had been evacuated for safety. Israel has denied the Al-Mawasi attack. In addition to the bombardment, witnesses reported sighting Israeli tanks in central Rafah yesterday, raising questions about whether this, if not the bombing campaign, constitutes the type of ground offensive that Biden said would trigger his red line and provoke him to withdraw military support from Israel. Now, the answer from the White House is a clear no. At a White House briefing yesterday, National Security Council Communications Coordinator John Kirby was asked directly whether tanks moving into central Rafah constitute a major ground operation. Let's assess his response.
Admiral, you've said repeatedly that the U.S. doesn't want to see a major ground operation in Rafah, but Israeli tanks just moved into central Rafah. How is that not a major military operation?
Well, again, I don't want to talk about Israeli Defense Force operations, but my understanding is, and I believe the Israelis have spoken to this, that they are moving along something called the Philadelphia corridor, which is on the outskirts of the town, not in the town proper. That's what the Israelis have said. We're not on the ground, Gabe. We're not there. I mean, you know, we don't have troops that can look at every single soldier and where they are. We're going based on what the Israelis are telling us and what they're saying publicly and what we're able to discern as best we can. As you and I speak here today, we have not seen a major ground operation, and these tanks are moving along a corridor that they have told us previously that they would use on the outskirts of the town to try to put pressure on Hamas.
Well, perhaps going on what the Israelis are telling him is in fact the problem. A Rafah resident told CNN, who is on the ground, that Israeli tanks were seen at the Al-Awada roundabout in the center of the city, not merely along the Philadelphia corridor, a buffer zone that runs along the Egypt-Gaza border. You can see how close the Philadelphia corridor is to Al-Awada, where the tanks were spotted in this map. Now, Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib immediately called out the State Department's claim that it simply wasn't able to verify the presence of tanks in central Rafah, tweeting at Secretary Blinken, "You have eyes. Stop pretending you care with these idiotic statements coming out of the State Department." As you can see, her quote tweet includes a picture of a tank in central Rafah published by the Jerusalem Post. Now, the journalist at the State Department briefing did follow up on this, pointing out that an NBC crew on the ground also identified tanks in central Rafah specifically, not on the outskirts of the town. What did Kirby do then? Well, he moved the goalposts.
NBC's crew in Gaza has described it as being central Rafah. If it were to be central Rafah, would that be considered a major?
A single tank? A single tank with a dozen or so guys? And I mean, look, we're talking about, you know, you're dragging me into a hypothetical, and I hate that, but one tank, one armored vehicle does not constitute a major ground operation. Now, I'm not saying that that's what's going on right now. What I'm telling you is what the Israelis have told us about what they're doing. They tell us on the outskirts. A major ground operation is, you know, thousands and thousands of troops moving in a maneuvered, concentrated, coordinated way against a variety of targets on the ground, the kinds of things we've seen, we've done ourselves. That's what we're talking about here.
Apparently, the red line is more like a red goalpost. One tank and a sustained aerial bombing campaign apparently are not sufficient to constitute a major ground invasion. Unless thousands and thousands of Israeli troops enter Rafah, Biden, it seems, will not impose consequences for Israel's conduct. Well, I'm interested to hear the State Department's excuses later in the week, since today, Haaretz reported that the IDF is sending more troops into Rafah. The only question is, will that be enough to force Biden to admit Bibi has violated his red line? Now, it seems obvious that there's a relationship between the lack of consequences for Israel's behavior and Israel's choice to keep escalating the conflict. For example, launching another aerial bombardment just days after claiming Sunday's attack was a mistake. The journalist asked a final question on exactly this point.
And then one last thing on a strike today, at least 21 people killed in a strike that hit a tent encampment in southern Gaza today. What's the U.S. response to that?
We can't verify those reports. The Israelis are saying publicly that there was no such strike, so I'd point you to them.
So because the Israelis are saying publicly that there was no additional strike, America takes it at its word, no matter how many times Israel has lied before. Now, ironically, you'll find more skepticism in the Israeli press than behind the podium at a White House briefing room. As journalist Amira Haas wrote in Haaretz yesterday, quote, "The only ones still buying the Israeli army's version of the Rafah strike are devoted consumers of Israeli media." Of Israel's claim that the IDF did not expect to hit civilians in the course of its Sunday Rafah strike, she writes, quote, "Such a disingenuous announcement can only be issued to consumers of the same media that for 7 months had been hiding the unbearably high figures and choking photographs of toddlers who were killed or injured in every Israeli strike on the Gaza Strip." But no matter how unbelievable the State Department story is, that Israel made a mistake, that it's investigating itself, that Biden still does have a red line, the Biden administration spokespeople maintained their stance all through the tough questioning yesterday. Listen to this exchange between CBS senior White House political correspondent Ed O'Keefe and Kirby, in which he challenges Kirby on Biden's red line.
How does this not violate the red line that the president laid out?
As I said, we don't want to see a major ground operation. We haven't seen that at this point.
How many more charred corpses does he have to see before the president considers a change in policy?
We don't want to see a single more innocent life taken, and I kind of take a little offense at the question.
Now, Kirby was offended by the question, how many charred corpses does it take for Biden to say Israel has gone too far? In fact, he seemed much more offended by the question than by the fact of the charred corpses to begin with. But here is why the journalists in the briefing room, many of whom repeated a version of this question, were unsatisfied. As I pointed out in yesterday's Radar, Israel has been tasked with investigating itself for decades. And the outcome of these investigations has been either total exoneration or admissions that mere mistakes were made, which don't warrant any consequences. An American journalist or activist or humanitarian killed, it's a mistake, but not one Israel has to pay for. In your view, is that likely to have an effect on Israel's conduct going forward? Moreover, if Israel keeps making these mistakes, snipers shooting journalists, doctors, and children in the head, bombing refugee camps and hospitals, why should America keep trusting this error-prone Amelia Bedelia of a country with billions of dollars in murder machines? As for Kirby's insistence that the Biden administration is monitoring the situation and that it's working behind the scenes to moderate Israel's approach, well, CNN's Abby Phillips played a supercut during her monologue last night that illustrates the empty redundancy of the Biden administration's regrets about the loss of Palestinian life.
This was the Biden administration today.
There should be no innocent life lost here as a result of this conflict. Israel must take every precaution possible to do more to protect innocent life.
And this has been the administration since October.
It's absolutely devastating to see the loss of life.
Far too many civilians have been killed as a result of combat operations.
We will continue to consult with our Israeli partners and urge them to take all necessary measures to protect civilians. We regret any loss of life, and any loss of life is tragic. We've engaged with our Israeli partners, have continued to encourage them to do everything possible to mitigate civilian harm. No one wants to see innocent civilians killed in this conflict, whether they be Palestinian or Israeli. And, again, we think it is tragic when any innocent civilian is killed, whether that's Palestinian, Israeli. We will continue to communicate with our Israeli partners on the importance of taking civilian safety into account in their operations.
All that concern and not much in the way of changed outcomes. Now, listen to Kirby's response to the Hill's own Niall Stanage after he asked whether the administration condemns Israel's May 26th attack.
I know what you want me to say. I get it. There should be no civilians killed. I'm not going to stand up here and make an excuse for any single individual civilian being killed. There's no excuse for it. It should not happen. Now, it does happen in war. It happens sometimes deliberately, and sometimes it happens by tragic mistake. We will find out soon what was the case here on Sunday, and then we'll go from there. But no civilian casualty should be acceptable.
Let's examine the premise for a second that Israel needs time to investigate, that the investigation will be in good faith, and that Israel is willing to hold itself accountable in a way that might have an effect on its future behavior. At no point in my lifetime has any of that been true. BBC State Department spokesperson Tom Bateman absolutely destroys this premise in a back and forth with State Department spokesman Matt Miller. Let's take a listen to that.
You cannot reach a conclusion about the results of these investigations in the middle of a conflict.
That's not what I'm asking you to do.
But it is to have faith in the process. You have to have faith in. You have to be able to look at what the outcomes it has generated are.
But
and we're not at a place where you can do
this conflict is 100 years old. In its current form, it's probably 40, 50 years old. And when the IDF says that, or the internal system says there is a process of internal investigation, I'm asking you for some evidence that is effective, that it stops it happening again, that it creates accountability. And so, for example, in the last 2 years, with 2 American citizens who have been killed, there has been no meaningful accountability. When at the time, what the Israelis said was, there is an investigation, and you have relied on that as well.
Now, as a rejoinder, Miller goes on to cite one instance in which Israel said it disciplined soldiers who sang a Jewish prayer at a mosque in Jenin in the West Bank, as though the scale of that offense and the choice to remove the soldiers from operational activity have any bearing on the thousands of deaths, displacements, and accusations of rape and torture currently hanging over the Israeli state. What about these cases? Murders in which Israel cleared itself of wrongdoing after an investigation. 6-year-old Hein Rajab was killed by the IDF in January. The Central Food Kitchen Aid workers were killed on April 1st. The Intercept's Prim Tucker has repeatedly asked the Biden administration for updates on Israel's investigations and for accountability for Israel. And here's what our State Department had to say to him when he tried to follow up back in April.
Thank you, Matt. It's been 110 days since journalist Samir Abu Daqqa was killed, 65 days since 6-year-old Hein Rajab, her family, the medics had to save her, were killed. Per Sean and other colleagues' earliest question, today should be Shireen Abu Akleh's birthday, our Palestinian-American colleague, I might add, killed in 2022. So I'm wondering if you have updates on not just the investigations, but actual accountability measures in response to these. And if not, how can this administration's approach of relegating things to months-long investigations while not changing policy, all as thousands more are killed, be a justified approach?
So I would say that with respect to Shireen, I did speak to that a moment ago.
Right, but in terms of accountability,
I know. We condemned her killing when it happened. We still condemn it now. There was an investigation conducted by the United States that found no reason to believe that death was intentional, but it is a tragedy nonetheless. With respect to investigations, and look, this is, I used to have to answer questions on behalf of the Justice Department that were very similar to this. Investigations in some cases take.
Since then, not only have scores more Palestinians been killed, we now know that Israeli Mossad agents blackmailed and intimidated the former ICC prosecutor for years to keep her from pursuing accountability from Israel. This is the country that America is deferring to. And for what? At least one journalist did ask exactly that yesterday. For what? What do you say to Americans who want to know why their tax dollars are going to these strikes, which have been killing civilians?
But we are seeing tanks in Rafah. We've now seen strikes continue to kill civilians, including children.
Yeah.
Just for, an average American who's watching their taxpayer dollars go to this, can you explain to them how this isn't a major military operation? Or just maybe it would help to explain what is a major ground operation when it comes to the Biden administration.
I thought I already did that, but I'm happy to do it again. Now, first of all, I am not the IDF spokesman, and this is not Tel Aviv. This is the White House press briefing room. And I am not, today or any other day, going to take it upon myself to speak to Israeli military operations, the planning, the intent, and the tactics that they're using. You should be asking Admiral Hagari that question. He's the IDF spokesman, not me.
Now, Kirby may not technically be the IDF spokesman, but it is American bombs that the IDF is dropping on Rafah, and America's protection that enables Israel to stand alone against the international community, able to act with impunity. The bombs dropped by Israel on the tent city in Rafah were literally made in America by Boeing. So the question remains, what is America going to do about its closest ally, murdering civilians every day for over half a year? That answer, it seems, is that we're going to keep paying for it at the very least.
Yeah, as I said earlier in the show, I don't think the line that, oh, well, they're investigating and we need to let them investigate is going to put very many people at ease. That's not even an Israel thing. That's just government's investigating themselves for alleged wrongdoing. Fantastic. The Biden administration has put themselves in a difficult position by appearing to, or at least rhetorically saying, that they object to certain actions being taken by Israel in terms of the loss of civilian life. I think most people recognize that a lot of civilians have died, and it's really unconscionable and really horrible. Look, it is. You could have the position, the Biden administration could take the position that we support what Israel is doing, and we think the elimination of Hamas is worth this amount of suffering among civilians, and we, in fact, think we should support it monetarily with weapons and everything. But they're really not saying that. What they're saying is, well, we'll support it up to a point, but they can't do X, Y, and Z. But then they've clearly done X, Y, and Z, and it puts Biden in the administration, at least, in this weak position of saying, well, we said we support them, but they can't do this. But they do this anyway, and, well, we're going to hem and haw about it and hope there's an investigation, and that's good. Nobody is. Is anyone persuaded by that? I don't think anyone's persuaded by that.
Yeah, the shift from it can't be a ground invasion to, okay, well, there's tanks on the ground now. Is this permissible?
It can't be a really big ground invasion.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not working. I don't, regardless of what's going on, I, as a kind of America first non-interventionist, would rather us be minimally as uninvolved as possible, and we should stop funding what's going on, and I think that would be the correct course of action, but it's certainly not one Biden wants to take, and so he's in this position.
One thing that's so interesting to me is that this strategy has worked for a very long time. I really take your point that there is healthy skepticism about any institution governing itself. I think it's part of why, speaking of Boeing, when we were talking about some of those episodes of Boeing malpractice, Boeing being put in charge of its own self-review was the beginning of a lot of the problems that we're seeing today. So, I accept that. But politically and rhetorically, this strategy has been working for Israel. And you heard it a little bit with the Matt Miller response when he was asked about, when has Israel ever been accountable before? When have any of these investigations actually resulted in a change in policy? And the thing that he pulls out of the ether is this one example of some IDF soldiers who were kind of making a mockery of Islam by doing Jewish prayers in a mosque. Okay. For one, I'm not saying it's right to do that, but in terms of comparing it to all the other kind of charges that we're concerned about here, it's the most de minimis thing.
Trivial.
And it's very easy to hold somebody accountable for something that deserves very little punishment in the grand scheme of things. You don't throw someone in jail for that. These people didn't even get fired or rejected from the military, which maybe they should have for that, right? And we've seen TikTok after TikTok of Israeli soldiers trying on the clothes of Palestinian women and doing all kinds of other things, but maybe would merit pushback, which also has not merited pushback. So the idea that that's his example of Israel being held accountable, when Prem Tucker brings up the sniper killing of an American soldier, the sniper assaults of multiple Palestinian children, the Red Crescent being attacked as they go to try to save the life of a 6-year-old Palestinian girl. I mean, it really does give the game away. So I do wonder if going forward, if Israel's going to recognize that it's really destroyed a rhetorical strategy that has been built up over decades that has been very effective in shielding itself from this kind of scrutiny by trying to make America defend, frankly, the indefensible over the course of the last 7 months.
More Rising right after this.